You know that moment when you have a vision of yourself in the future and you see yourself achieving something great, and then that nagging voice in your head says, "No, that's not you. You can't do that." That's a limiting self belief talking, and today we're going to talk about how to fix that. We all have many different beliefs about ourselves, some that help us and serve us, and some that do not. Limiting beliefs and self doubt are like these artificial boxes that we create around ourselves. And whether we recognize it or not, all of us place ourselves into boxes to some extent, and these boxes have artificial walls that we create in our minds that act as limits for what we think we can achieve and who we think we can be. Whenever you hear someone say something like, "Oh, I'm just not good at math," or "Oh, I'm not good at anything," insert in the blank there, that's someone hitting their head up against the wall of this mental box. And all too often, we define ourselves by these limiting beliefs or self doubts. But why do we do that if these beliefs clearly do not serve us? One way to look at it is that since we were kids, we've all been developing beliefs over many years. Some of these beliefs came from internal forces, meaning we would do something or think about something and tell ourselves that we are a certain way. And sometimes it would come from external sources, meaning either our parents or friends or people around us in our environment would tell us things over and over again. Maybe we did really well on a test and we were praised for our good performance. Or we did really poorly on something and were scolded. And we didn't try again because we had this false belief in our head that even if we were to try again, we wouldn't be able to do it. Whatever the initial cause may have been, whether it's from internal forces or external forces from our environment, these messages have been internalized and end up creating false beliefs later in life. But if these beliefs are false and they don't serve us, why do we believe them? Well, in a lot of ways, we're creatures of habit, and it's so much easier to fall into a pattern of behavior than to change the pattern of thinking. Once we begin to develop small bits of negative thought patterns or negative self esteem or negative limiting beliefs in some way, it's so much easier to just acquiesce with them and go along with them rather than to recognize them and challenge them and do something about it. So then the question really is, how do we navigate away from this self destructive pattern of thinking? When we're looking to change our negative self beliefs, there's a lot of different directions we can go. Recognizing where they may have come from, like from the past, whether from internal sources or external sources, that can definitely be a powerful thing. If we feel like, "Oh, yeah, I was always told this as a kid and now I believe that," well, that makes a lot of sense. And sometimes just the more we understand something, the freer we become from the constraints of that thought. The first thing we want to do is we want to recognize and call out the negative self belief. When we recognize the belief and we recognize something is happening, it takes us out of the emotional experience of whatever is happening and brings us more to the logical realm that we can actually think and do something about it. For example, oftentimes if we're feeling angry, but we don't necessarily recognize it, we're just going around with this bad attitude and brooding all day. But suddenly, when we call it out and say to ourselves in our mind's voice, we say, "Okay, I'm angry." And by recognizing that, it now allows us to tangibly do something about it rather than just being stuck in the emotional experience, the feeling of the moment. Another important thing with recognizing negative self beliefs is recognizing that this may have become a habit. Oftentimes, these negative beliefs aren't just an isolated event of, "Man, I don't think I can do this one thing." Oftentimes, these are more self encompassing and maybe reflective on overall self esteem. So, recognizing the habitual pattern of thinking is also a powerful way to bring us out of it and develop a new pattern. And by recognizing that this pattern of thinking is sort of like a habit, well, the same way bad habits may be formed unconsciously, good habits can now be formed consciously. So, besides for recognizing where it may have come from and calling it out, actually challenging the negative belief is going to be really valuable. Generally speaking, these negative self beliefs aren't backed by any evidence, and recognizing that is really important. And even if these negative self beliefs are backed by some form of evidence, usually we're really over exaggerating the impact of it in our mind. The same example of if you're a little kid and you were told you did bad on a test and you were scolded, well, now thinking that you're going to be bad at tests forever doesn't really make sense. And so many negative beliefs really work like that we have one or two negative things that happen to us and we just assume that life will always be that way. So either we challenge this negative self belief with things that we already have achieved and already have done, and we challenge it with evidence. And if we really find that, you know what, I've been so held down by this negative self belief that I've never done anything to prove it otherwise, well, then figure out what it is you need to do to prove it otherwise and start building confidence through competence. Just because we have a negative self belief doesn't mean that it actually has to limit our action. That's why calling it out is important to take us out of the emotional experience of it, because then we're able to logically work through it and now challenge it by giving ourselves more evidence that we are actually able to do that thing. So we want to start doing something that our negative self belief is telling us that we can't or that we're scared of. So, how do we start to approach something that we're scared of? One thing that I found tremendously valuable in trying to do new things that I feel some apprehension towards, I'm not so sure about, is to visualize the success of it before it even happens. For example, if you feel a lot of social anxiety, but you want to work your way up to being able to go to a social gathering, go to a party, something like that, well, one, starting slow, breaking your goal down into smaller increments can be helpful, but also visualizing what you're going to do before you walk in is really important. You walk up to the front door and you're nervous, you're sweating, you're thinking about, oh man, what if they hate me? What if no one here likes me? And then you catch yourself in that moment. You call it out and you say, okay, I'm feeling anxious right now. This is a limiting self belief. And then you visualize yourself right before you walk in the party, say, I'm going to walk in and think about how you're going to start greeting people and see yourself in your mind's eye, start to have conversation with people, start to get comfortable, shake a few people's hands, get interested in conversation. And by visualizing it, it almost primes your mind to succeed in the same way that the negative self-belief may be accompanied by a vision in the mind's eye. Now we're replacing it with positive self-beliefs of, okay, this is how I believe it can happen. And then the next important thing is to actually take the step to do the thing that you don't believe that you can do. And once again, it's important to break our goals down into smaller, more manageable steps. We may not go from 0 to 100 all of a sudden, but with the person who's scared of a party, it doesn't have to be that he goes into a huge social gathering of 100 plus people and now he's the man of the hour and he's meeting so many people. It can be, okay, I'm nervous around people, so I'm going to go and try to meet one new person in the park or play basketball with a new group of people or something, anything like that. And break it down into smaller, more manageable goals. But once you visualize the success, then actually start trying to achieve it with your actions. Another important step in challenging the things that we're scared of or that we feel some sort of apprehension towards is a mindset shift. It's the mindset of, if you don't succeed, try again, sort of. But I like to phrase it more like, I may not be good at this now, but that doesn't mean I won't be good at it later. Things take time, things take practice. If you're someone who is nervous in social situations, you may not develop social skills to be super charismatic right away. And that's okay. But by recognizing this and having a mindset shift of, I may not be the expert at it now, but I will be able to get better, knowing that you can improve or succeed in what you want to, is already challenging the negative self-belief, and your actions will start to follow that the more you practice these things. Challenging negative self-beliefs can be so difficult because everyone has them to an extent, and oftentimes these are formed in the unconscious part of our mind, and it's so difficult to bring it up. And if you found this valuable and you want to continue conquering self-doubt, I encourage you to subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it with a friend who you think may benefit, and remember to hit life on all cylinders.